It's universally known that writer Stephen King commonly injects himself and his turbulent life experiences into his works. In fact, it's natural and, dare I say, cliche for writers to write stories about writers because, well, they're writers, and writing can often be a creatively, emotionally, morally, and spiritually challenging ordeal, even speaking for myself. As such, a mystery thriller about a depressed, melancholic writer suffering from writer's block while tormented by a manifestation of his own creation isn't exactly what one might call inspired. Secret Window, Secret Garden is a novella published in King's 1990 anthology 4 Past Midnight that, unless you're a die-hard King fan, is perhaps almost exclusively known for its 2004 film adaptation starring Johnny Depp. It tells the story of a troubled writer called Morton Rainey, who spends his days secluded in his vacation home trying to write a new novel while going through a messy divorce. However, his stresses only worsen when a mysterious man called John Shooter comes knocking at his door and accusing Morton of plagiarism. What ensues is a strange and enigmatic conflict as Morton attempts to prove his innocence and figure out who this man is as Shooter's actions grow increasingly violent. Now, in all honesty up front, this is far from being one of King's better works. For a novella, it's meaty and complex, and there are many thoughtful nuances given to Morton's character and the circumstances around his divorce. However, it suffers from the fatigue of having seen it all before. While I will try to uphold the mystery until we get to the latter half, I imagine most people will figure out where the story is going, as contrary to its name, it's not exactly all that good at being secretive. Now, I will be focusing on it through the lens of the film because despite several differences, particularly in the ending, which I will address in the most detail later in the video, I think most of us just generally know it better. I'll also cop out and say that the journey matters more than the destination in many respects because, personally speaking, I saw through all its attempts at misdirection and deception almost immediately, but I am conscious of the fact that some people won't, so I want to try and be careful how I go about it, but it's really hard to pussyfoot in that regards. Nonetheless, when I saw it as a teenager, it went completely over my head, so brace yourself. Now, I know what you're thinking. If only Morton had a pair of comfortable, waterproof footwear, could he better relax and enjoy the great outdoors around him? And that's why this video is sponsored by Vezi. While summer is upon us, weather often still remains unpredictable, and Vezi weekend sneakers are the perfect all-in-one shoe that combines practicality, affordability, and style. Weekend sneakers are easily one of my favorite pairs of shoes. I have them reliably by the door for easy slip-on simplicity to suit every occasion, from running errands to taking cheddar on long walks to going out with friends to even more formal events. Their lightweight design makes for wonderful all-day wear, and their stretchy, breathable material helps reduce heat and sweat buildup during hotter days and more strenuous adventures. And that's on top of their incredible 100% waterproof technology to combat puddles, mud, and messier terrain. In fact, I recommend them so strongly I genuinely gifted my fiance, my best friend, and my dad a pair because they're made for literally everyone, and it just cuts out the utter hassle of dredging through the closet each morning for a pair of shoes to fit specific activities and weather. Vezi makes every day a little easier by bringing comfort in every step, so why not check out Vezi's impressive range by simply scanning the QR code or visiting vezi.com/ryanhollinger now for 15% off your first pair at checkout and start exploring with confidence. For a bit of context, Secret Window was essentially developed by King as a reinterpretation of themes he previously explored in both Misery and The Dark Half, specifically the power that fiction could have over reality. On the one hand, Misery was based on King's experience with an obsessive fan who aggressively felt the author's characters were real, who is recontextualized here as John Shooter. And on the other, massive spoiler alert, The Dark Half was about an author who manifests his own dark pseudonym into reality, thus Morton is a self-insert for King's own troubled obsession with his macabre ideas. As such, Secret Window, by its own ironic nature, is deliberately derivative and ties itself into Morton's own insecurities as an author, trying to rekindle his inspiration, while comprehending the fact that, in the words of Red Letter Media, he might actually be a bit of a hack fraud. King stated that the plagiarism angle came purely from accusations he faced throughout his entire career, but while it remains a key plot point to drive the conflict, the film makes the mistake in completely overlooking the thematic significance it's given in the novella that I'll address when talking about the ending. The film opens by coldly throwing us right into the aggravated shoes of Morton as he tries to talk himself out of confronting his worst fear, which is catching his wife Amy having an affair at a motel with a man called Teddy. It establishes the underlying psyche of his character. He likes to avoid confrontation and suppress his feelings, but after being faced with infidelity, he's grown embittered and impatient with both the world and himself. The setup is framed visually like one of his dramatic novels, which is confirmed directly after when the opening lines of his latest work are explicitly referencing the affair. Like King, Morton writes through his own experiences, and 6 months on, while still in the midst of a divorce settlement he's stubbornly refusing to engage with, he's wallowing in his misery and disconnected himself from everyone around him. It's here where the brooding and confrontational John Shooter suddenly arrives to torment Morton into action when he leaves behind his short story Sowing Season, which to Morton's panicked realization does in fact share many plot similarities to his own short story Secret Window. From the passage that Morton reads, the story basically deals with someone ruminating on killing their wife and burying her body in the back garden where no one will find her. Yet in Morton's version, the difference seems to be that it reflects on happier times the protagonist had with their wife, thus resulting in a very different ending. However, Morton soon finds relief when he realizes his story was already published in a magazine 2 years prior to Shooter's claims, leading Shooter to demand evidence in the next 3 days or risk him disgracing Morton's reputation. Although, where shit truly hits the fan is when Morton discovers his dog, or cat if you read the novella, murdered with a screwdriver, causing him to accuse Shooter and hire a PI to investigate the mysterious man. Now, what stuck out to me immediately about John Turturro's performance is how heightened and at times borderline caricature it can be, as though he's a character from one of Morton's novels. In fact, in the novella, he reminds Morton of a character out of a William Faulkner novel, thus you can see how I and many others picked up on where this might be going. Nonetheless, Shooter's arrival basically serves to unearth the pain and anger Morton has been trying to suppress since his divorce, with the evidence he needs to get Shooter off his back being in his old house, which Amy now owns with her lover Teddy. Essentially, when you think about it, Shooter becomes this spiritual, superstitious force that makes Morton confront what he's been avoiding for so long. Hell, after attempting to get the magazine but bailing after seeing Amy and Ted leave the house, Morton is once again confronted by Shooter, who just seems to come out of nowhere. In other words, I never once took him for a real person. My hunch was always that Shooter was a figment of Morton's imagination, an intrusive thought that's tormenting him to get closure, especially when Shooter decides to offer him a compromise. Morton simply has to change the ending of his original story, and Shooter will leave him alone. The next day, Amy informs Morton that their house burned down in an arson attack, which tries to make you believe is Shooter's doing, possibly to destroy the evidence, but it's hard to buy that deception when Morton is literally shown outside the house the previous evening talking to himself. Nonetheless, the arson attack serves to bring Teddy into the fray when, like Shooter, his presence triggers Morton into revealing more of his unhealthy and erratic mindset, especially his vicious antagonism towards Amy. Morton eventually accuses Teddy of hiring Shooter to intimidate him into signing the divorce settlement he's been trying to avoid, when Teddy mentions growing up in Shooter's Bay in the south, making Morton think Shooter is actually an alias to hint at Teddy's involvement. The film by this point is greatly benefiting from the subtleties in Johnny Depp's performance, as he tries to hide the cracks in his composure as his anger seeps through. There's no doubt that Morton is on the verge of a mental breakdown in the way Depp performs the character, but things only turn deadlier when Morton goes to meet with the PI and a witness called Tom, who Morton says can identify Shooter when he saw them arguing near his house. To his horror, Morton finds both men murdered by Shooter as a warning not to get others involved, even implicating Morton using tools from his own house, forcing Morton to dispose of the bodies himself, leaving him unable to go to the police. Look, we're well and truly deep enough into the story at this point that you're probably asking, are Morton and Shooter the same person? And the answer is, mostly. So, on day 3, Morton receives a call from Amy crying with regret and suggesting their marriage broke down after the death of their baby. It provides missing context to the affair, where Amy claims that she had already broken up with Morton before she boned Teddy, making the conflict all the more complicated. In Morton's world though, he's still the victim. He's the one who's been shafted in a divorce, while he seems to think Amy has been living a happy, healthy and guilt-free life, when clearly she's been going through her own struggles. However, the major revelation that's been withheld from us when Morton confronted Amy and Teddy at the motel is that he threatened them with what he claims to have been an unloaded gun. So what does Shooter's desire to change the ending mean? Well, he wants Morton to go back and follow through with that murder. After the call, Morton goes into town to collect the magazine from the post office, only to discover the original publication has been cleanly cut out, which goes on to suggest that he did it himself, because once he gets home, he finds Shooter's hat waiting for him, and he puts it on, embracing the persona. It's revealed that Morton has, would you believe it, multiple personality disorder, and Shooter is a psychotic creation that oversees the dirty work, while the moral, guilt-ridden Morton lives ignorantly with a clean conscience. It's here where I realized that's why this movie reminded me so much of Identity. Emboldened by Morton's repression, isolation, and bitterness, Shooter's personality basically takes over as the sole driver. Oh, and to throw a Stephen King reference in there, the film has its own all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy moment by having Morton write Shooter all over the house, only for it to actually mean shoot her, as in his conscience has always been telling Morton to pull the trigger. The film and novella greatly deviate at this point, as the film commits to this viciously harrowing climax where Morton murders both Amy and Teddy without any resistance. It coldly ends with Morton reciting the narration of Shooter's story, where Morton has buried the bodies in the back garden and laments that one day their disappearance will be forgotten. Morton is ostracized from the town, and the local sheriff even bluntly accuses him of murder but without evidence. However, Morton isn't worried about any of this because he's overcome his writer's block. He's happily moved on from his past and certain of a pleasant future. His rejuvenation is even symbolized in the bountiful corn that has grown from the garden, fertilized by the victims of his past. The novella, on the other hand, goes in the opposite direction, where Morton is actually shot dead by a fucking insurance agent called Fred Evans, who's overseeing the arson attack and follows Amy to the house just in time to save her. The novella's epilogue focuses on the agent talking with Amy and Teddy about Morton's apparent history of mental illness, with Amy highlighting that Morton was already plagued with intense guilt over having actually plagiarized and been caught out on it, causing a lucrative film deal to fall through. This is the crucial thematic point that the film seems to forget. Morton's writer's block is a product of that guilt and the imposter syndrome he feels. As such, Shooter was manifested not simply out of the bitterness towards his marriage and as a means of revenge, but as a punishment to himself for his, well, let's call it literary infidelity. In the novella, it's very clear that both his personal and professional lives are falling apart in equal measure, and the result is simply a writer who cracks under the pressure of it all. However, King's version doesn't just end there. Instead, it goes a step further with the manifestation of one's own creation by strongly insinuating that Shooter felt so real that he became real, a tulpa if you will. In fact, the novella tells us Shooter literally faded into reality as the witness Tom, instead of not seeing anyone with Morton, told someone that he could see right through the person Morton was with. Basically, Shooter becomes more physical as the story progresses and Morton goes further and further into his own mind. It's dismissed by the group initially, but Amy then presents the insurance agent with a letter addressed to her by Shooter that claims he's returned home, and all is right with the world once again, which Amy then claims resembles nothing like Morton's own handwriting. So here's the thing, I usually debate which ending I prefer, but I think I lean mostly on the novella. I like the film's grounded, bleaker ending in the way that it plays into the sense of inevitability that's established from the very opening, but the novella adds this genuine creep factor that the film still could have used itself by adding this ambiguous curveball to what is ultimately still a story you've seen in some variation before. However, until next time, stay safe, stay away from plagiarism, and I'll see you all very soon. Bye.